Kingdom of Men, Chapter 8. Assassin. KaLeah ran fast, holding the dress up as high as she could manage. When she got to Amira's room, she found the doors unguarded. The men must have run off when the alarm sounded. Their duty was first to the castle, second to the princess. It was KaLeah's job to protect Amira, and nobody knew that she wasn't inside the room with her. Once inside her room, KaLeah went straight to the secret passageway entrance. It was behind a mountain landscape tapestry hanging on the wall beside Amira's bed. "Amira, it's KaLeah," she said. She moved the tapestry and opened the door. Amira leapt out and threw her arms around KaLeah's midsection, knocking the breath out of her. She was dressed in a long silver nightgown, but her eyes were wide and alert, as if she hadn't yet gone to bed. "What's happening?" Amira asked. "Are we being attacked?" "I think so," KaLeah answered. "I wanted to make sure you were safe. Let's get you some warmer clothes, blankets, and some pillows so you can hide in the passageway." "You mean so we can hide?" KaLeah started to gather items and toss them through the opening into the dark hallway. "No, just you." "But I don't want to stay here alone," Amira said, her voice shooting up in pitch and volume. "Where are you going? Why can't you hide with me?" "Amira, people are trying to get into the castle to hurt us," KaLeah said. "You're better off staying where they can't find you. And since I can fight, it's my duty to defend the castle." She felt the resistance to her own words flooding up. She knew better than to run out into the night, but her body was shaking with adrenaline. Her hands ached to grab the sword and fight alongside the soldiers. KaLeah knew that if she crawled into the passageway with Amira, that she wouldn't be able to sit still for more than a few moments. The battle called to her. Amira rolled her eyes. "There are soldiers out there, my father's soldiers, and it is their duty to protect the kingdom. You're supposed to protect me." "I am protecting you by making sure you are safely hidden. Now take this blanket and climb back into the passageway." "Why can't I go out and fight too?" Amira asked. "Because protecting yourself is one thing, throwing yourself into the mouths of your enemies is quite another. You've never had a sword go through your belly or daggers in your eyes. You've never seen blood flowing from an open wound, soaking the ground at your feet." "You can stop talking now," Amira said. "I'll stay." The princess reluctantly grabbed the blanket and tromped back into the passageway. "Just relax and try to get some sleep. I'll be back soon." It took every bit of control KaLeah had to make sure the secret door was closed and the tapestry set back in place, smoothing it down instead of running out of the door. She slid a chair over in front of the tapestry, hoping to conceal the passageway even further. KaLeah left Amira's room and made a quick stop in her own room to change out of the dress and arm herself. She didn't have any armor and wasn't sure if enemies were already in the castle or not, so in haste, she grabbed a thick book and shoved it into her brown shirt as a makeshift breastplate. She pulled on her old hunting boots over black pants, then strapped 2 daggers to her belt and grabbed the sword. She ran as fast as she could down the halls and stairs to the castle entrance. As she got closer, she could hear metal hitting metal, men calling out, and screams of pain. She got to the entrance of the castle and ran out toward the gates beyond the cobblestone. She heard feet pounding damp grass as men ran and fought one another, dragons neighing and complaining, and what she imagined to be bodies thudding to the ground. She was breathing fast and had to warn herself about the lack of oxygen and fainting. What kind of a soldier would she be if she only lasted 2 minutes from running too hard? KaLeah took one long, deep breath and held it, let it out, and took in another, slowly. She was suddenly afraid of death, afraid of the faces of men beyond the large gates, afraid they would all charge her the moment she emerged. Still, she kept moving forward. Her ears popped and began to ring. The whispers sounded like individual voices this time, and they were telling her to go. She clearly heard the words, "Go fight," over and over. The strange, guttural voices seemed to be driving her on. She was becoming more comfortable with the mental intrusions. Running through the dark castle, listening to the men shouting orders to one another, knowing that she wouldn't be receiving any commands, hearing the voices made her feel less alone among all of the men. She felt more courageous. Her heart was beating hard, but she told herself that she couldn't be afraid. She had to go into battle. She was a fighter, and fighters fight. They don't comfort little girls in their nightgowns. She approached the gates, and the sound of metal crashing against metal was almost deafening. The dark fields surrounding the castle were covered with tiny sparkles of twinkling silver armor over white uniforms. Her vision began to adjust to the darkness, and she could see the faces and thick bodies of soldiers beneath their armor. Clusters of men were scattered and fighting across the fields between the front of the castle and the forest toward the horizon. The dead planet, Denlarak, hung above, silver in the moon's reflection. She could see the purple Extelen colors mingling with the red and white of the Bellarone army, but barely. It was easier to see the flashes of white in the moonlit night, giving the Extelen Legion an advantage. She made a mental note to tell someone later those white uniforms were not a good idea. At least she knew she wouldn't accidentally attack one of her own men. She wondered briefly about her lightweight sword and whether it could withstand blows from much heavier swords, or if it would snap in half. It had survived hits so far, but she hadn't been in actual battles. Instantly, she realized that it was foolish to be here without true armor or shields. She kicked herself for not going to the armory before heading into the fray. KaLeah shook away her doubts and ran onto the battlefield anyway. Before she'd made it 20 steps, something ice cold grabbed her ankle and yanked her, slamming her face down on the wet grass. She propped herself up but couldn't move. KaLeah looked back across the ground and into the scarred face of an Extelen soldier. He grinned dangerously across her own body at her. His fingers were wrapped around her ankle and squeezing tighter. He seemed to be reaching for something on the ground beside him, and KaLeah could see that he was unable to move from the waist down due to a very deep wound across the back of both legs. KaLeah scrambled to sit and lifted her sword, bringing it down fast across the middle of his arm. The man's scream made bumps crawl across her flesh, and when he jerked back, the arm didn't follow. KaLeah bounced up and then went looking for another man to fight, hoping the next one would be standing. She didn't have to go far. A man came rushing at her, and she got a good look at the Extelen uniform. It was black, but she noticed his shirt didn't have sleeves. She wondered if it was supposed to make him look tough in the chilly night, with blood stains on his biceps. The man had wild, long hair, and he raised his heavy sword above his head and kept coming. When he was near, he brought the sword down with a growl. KaLeah ducked and swung around behind him, keeping an eye out for other attackers. She jabbed her sword into his side, angling upwards so it would be a deadly blow. He hollered, staggered, and then spun around to whip her with his sword. KaLeah dodged him and stabbed him again, this time in the thigh. The man kept trying to fight her for a long time, but she grew tired of it, kicked the back of his legs, knocking him to the ground before driving her sword in again. Suddenly, there were warriors all around her, with bared arms and shiny teeth gleaming in the moonlight. She caught words like girl, easy, and is this her? While the three Extelens stood there gawking, she spun around, stabbed one, and then raised her sword diagonally in front of her, ready for another. Their mouths dropped open, and then two of the men grinned and stormed toward her. Metal was flying, and she could see her sword only when it came together against one of theirs with a deafening clang. It turned out to be lucky for KaLeah that she had a lightweight sword, otherwise she doubted her ability to keep up against two men at the same time. It took them twice as long to heave their swords back up for another blow. Nonetheless, her arms were already growing sore, and the reality of battle sunk in. If she tired, they would kill her. Although KaLeah had practiced with her father almost daily, it was always one against one. This was two fully grown, fully trained soldiers with swords against a village girl. KaLeah reminded herself that she had killed 3 men alone in the woods and 2 men on dragets, but it had been daylight. The second she killed 1 soldier, 3 more would appear from out of the darkness and from any direction. She could see the familiar faces of the Bellarone soldiers around her. They cast sideways glances and double takes as they crossed paths. She assumed they wondered what she was doing here and where the princess was. KaLeah didn't expect any of them to fight beside her or help her fend the Extellans off. She wasn't exactly their comrade, and she was a young woman. None of them had ever seen a woman fight. She ignored their puzzled expressions, shrugging off that familiar feeling of being out of place. The soldier she had stabbed had recovered. He joined the melee with a new sparkle of death in his eyes. KaLeah found herself in a corner, fighting off three very heavy swords. She couldn't dodge, turn, or even move. The men were closing in on her, pushing her up against the castle's curtain wall. KaLeah kept looking around for help, but every Bellarone soldier was already preoccupied with another fight. The three Extellans were sensing their victory, and KaLeah wanted to cry out. What have I done? What have I gotten myself into? I could be curled up next to the princess, napping and waiting it all out instead of bracing for death on a field of bloody men. It was too late to do anything. Sweat trickled down her face, and taste of metal was in her mouth, and there was a dry pain in her throat. Her sword fended off one blow, but the two others came down on her. She couldn't prevent their blows. She could feel the blade slice through her skin, and she fell to the ground. KaLeah, what in dragon's blood are you doing out here? The words were foggy and floated out in front of her, but she couldn't see who was talking. Her side hurt, and so did her back. KaLeah was lifted up, and she struggled to plant her feet back down on the oscillating ground. 1,000 tiny dots fuzzed in front of her eyes, and she felt dizzy. She took a deep breath and waited for the dots to vanish. When they did, she slowly focused and saw that it was Nicolot holding her steady. A soldier she didn't recognize was standing beside him. "Why are you out here?" Nicolot asked again. "You almost got yourself killed. Where's Amira?" KaLeah took another deep breath and noticed the three Extellans lying in a pile just beyond the feet of the soldier. She reached an arm around to her side, brought it back to her face, and saw blood on her fingers. "I actually got stabbed?" she said in disbelief, as if she was born to be indestructible. "Of course! You could have been killed," Nicolot said. There was no tenderness or sympathy in his voice. He spoke like a general disappointed in one of his men for making a very stupid mistake. "Luckily, we pulled the men back before they could injure you too badly, but that wound won't last much longer. You'll need to get bandaged up." He lifted up her shirt to look at the cuts on both of her sides. She felt embarrassed, having her shirt lifted in front of so many men. "They are shallow but bleeding. Now, get back inside the castle. I can't believe you left Amira." "No," KaLeah said, tenderly but firmly pulling her shirt back down. She tried to take a step away from him. Nicolot had a hold of her shoulders and pulled her back toward him. "What did you say?" he asked, his face turning red. "I said no," KaLeah said again. "The princess is safe and I have to fight." Nicolot shoved her against the wall, and the pain in her back exploded through her veins. She bit back a scream and straightened her shoulders, wincing. She knew she was being stupid, knew she had too much pride. Why couldn't she just acquiesce and run along inside like a good little girl? Nicolot looked like he was thinking, sizing her up. KaLeah knew he had just saved her, but it didn't really register. She was certain she did not need his help. "I am in charge here, and I'm ordering you to keep an eye on Lamone," Nicolot said. KaLeah squinted. Had she heard him correctly? "Lamone?" she asked. "I don't trust him," Nicolot said. "He may try something tonight, something traitorous. I need you to follow him around, watch him. He just went around the west side of the castle. I was following him, and that's when I saw you go down. With your wound, you won't last much longer out here tonight, so do as I ask." KaLeah had a feeling that there was more Nicolot wasn't telling her. She hated Lamone, but she didn't think Nicolot was suspicious of him. And suspicious of what? Her curiosity was beginning to bubble up, and suddenly she wanted Lamone to be the enemy. She wanted to catch him doing something that she could stop. She would bring him to Nicolot and the king as a traitor. Her rebellious need to fight, then getting wounded, wouldn't have been for nothing. "I will follow him," KaLeah said. Nicolot released his hold on her, and she started running off toward the west side of the castle. The pain in her side and across her back forced her to slow to a brisk walk, but she waited until she was out of Nicolat's sight first. She didn't know why, but she wanted him to be impressed with her and proud. She needed his admiration, and dying would not be the best way to do that, she realized, no matter how well she fought. KaLeah walked as quickly as she could toward the west end of the castle, with her sword slightly raised, ready to strike, but she soon realized that she was alone. The battle going on behind her was so loud she couldn't hear anything except for the clanging of swords. Out in the open darkness, she knew that if she couldn't hear an attacker, she could be caught off guard. KaLeah crept along the side of the castle, stopping every few moments to look behind her. Every step was becoming more and more painful, and a few times she thought she might pass out from the pain. KaLeah bit her tongue harder and moved on stiffly. KaLeah froze at the furthest corner of the castle. Before going any further, she knew she needed to peer around the thick stone column. She bent closer, and then stopped again. She could hear something, a faint whisper, not even a whisper, but more like she would imagine shards of glass falling on stone to sound like. KaLeah knew there had to be people around the corner talking. She started to wonder if Nicolat was sending her into a trap. KaLeah carefully peeked around the edge and saw two figures bathed in the shadows. If they hadn't been wearing reflective chainmail, she probably wouldn't have seen them at all. The two men suddenly broke apart, and she could see Lamone clearly now, walking straight toward her. KaLeah jerked her head back and tried to disappear into the castle wall's shadow. She had thought once that she may be misjudging Lamone's intelligence, but when he walked right by her and kept on walking, she knew she had not. She looked back around the corner and noticed the other man from the shadows was feeling with his fingers along the castle wall, looking for something. An entrance? KaLeah focused on the man and then gasped. He was wearing the purple and black uniform of an Extellan soldier, and he was trying to get into the castle. But why? She wondered. And what did it have to do with Lamone? The man looked over his shoulder like he had discovered what he had been looking for. Instantly, she forgot about following Lamone. This soldier was about to get into the castle unseen by everyone except her. KaLeah took a step toward him and then fell against the wall. Her entire back began quivering and she felt deathly ill. She thought she might throw up, but forcefully swallowed back the urge. KaLeah straightened back to standing as best she could, just in time to see the man disappear into the castle. She growled and pushed herself forward. She kept her eyes on the exact spot where he disappeared. The castle wall appeared to be solid stone, but she ran her fingers along the surface until she touched a bump in the stone. She pressed it, and there was a click, followed by a door swinging open before her eyes. KaLeah climbed through the door and saw a narrow hallway before her. She could hear the man's steps and followed the Extellan easily through the clammy darkness behind the servants' wing. She wondered if the Extellan was another assassin, and who he was after this time. She thought about Lamone. He was unarguably responsible for this man's actions and must have been behind the previous assassination attempts as well. KaLeah followed the man to a door that was swinging on its hinges. He wasn't hard to follow. His chainmail clanked with every step. She grabbed the swinging door and listened. He was in a small servant kitchen and moving toward the stairs going up. Even though the kitchen was considered the smallest one, it wasn't small. The room was long with pantries, ovens dug into the walls, large basin sinks, tables, and chairs. KaLeah waited for the man to reach the stairs before she crossed the kitchen to pursue him. She made sure to stay at least a floor beneath him as he climbed the staircase. The stairs creaked under his weight, but not so much under hers. KaLeah stepped when he did, so his creaking boards would muffle her own. She wondered how Lamone had known about the entrance through the smaller kitchen, and she realized how important learning the passageways with the captain would be. She had no idea where she was or where the man was going, but he did, and that unnerved her. KaLeah followed him up the stairs to the fourth floor and down a hallway she finally recognized. She stayed hidden in the staircase doorway and watched as the man went to Amira's bedroom door, looked around, then threw his weight into the door, attempting to break through. Her suspicions were confirmed. The man was an assassin, and Lamone had fed the man information on where Amira's bedroom was. KaLeah emerged from the shadows and ran up behind the man, who was stepping back to take another run at Amira's door. She was glad that she hadn't stopped to put on armor because she made no sound running up behind him. She plunged the sword through the middle of his back without hesitation and then kicked him to the floor. She withdrew her sword and watched as he drew himself into a fetal position on the stone floor. "Are you an Extellin?" KaLeah asked him. "Are you a man of King Sarzo? Are you looking for the princess? Answer, or I will—" KaLeah realized she couldn't do much more to the man. He was probably going to die anyway. What would the king's men do, she wondered? Take off his fingers, toes, or worse? Just then she saw blood begin to bubble from the man's mouth. "Oh, for spirit's sake," she said. "Now I'm going to get into trouble again. Are you dying? Really? It's not like my sword is poisoned. Did Lamone tell you how to get in here?" It was a stupid question. She had seen Lamone show him the door. "This torturing thing is not as easy as it sounds. Hey, are you still alive? Can you talk?" She kicked him, and he groaned, gurgled up more blood, and fell over dead. "Perfect," she said to herself. Then to the man, "You are no help at all, you know?" She pulled her sword back and struck him again. She made sure he was dead before dragging him away from Amira's door and dropping him in the middle of the hall. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should check in on Princess Amira, but looking at her blood-coated clothing, she thought it would scare the little girl too much. She inspected the doors to the princess's room as best she could, noticing they were heavily damaged now. The doors still appeared to be locked. Then she turned and headed back down the hallway to the stairs. She had to tell King Oresis about Lamone, she had to tell Nicolot, and she had to keep fighting. KaLeah's heart pumped against her throat, and the skin around her stab wound burned as if it had been peeled off. She didn't know how much longer she could keep breathing through the pain, but she didn't care and kept moving. She tried to ignore the agony. Her father had always told her that pain was only in the mind. It wasn't real, and only the strongest, best fighters could ignore the pain and fight through it. Ignore it. You're stronger than the pain. Be stronger than the pain. Breathe through the pain. Walk through the pain. Ignore it. There is no pain, only duty. It's all just in your head. KaLeah walked down to the small kitchen, heading back toward the entrance that led outside. She figured it would be better to sneak back out onto the quiet side of the castle, then dive straight back into the thick of the battle in front of the castle. The kitchen seemed twice as long as it had before, and she stumbled and crashed into a chair she had not seen. Her vision was starting to blur, and she held on to the chair to stable herself. Her body suddenly felt too heavy to support, and pain seemed to penetrate her all the way through to her bones. Her knees gave way first, and her fingers couldn't stay connected to the back of the chair. She hit the floor, and everything went dark.